I have the huge, immense pleasure, and I am so excited to have Aaron Jimenez here with me today talking, well, Latinx Spaces. Welcome, Aaron.
Well, thank you for having me, Professor Latinx.
So, Aaron, of course, I know that you did your BA in philosophy and a minor in Latin American studies at Southwestern. But what I don't know is really like your origin story and how you got into Latinx media spaces. Was there a kind of, a superhero moment for you, a white tiger moment when things like shifted? And yeah, maybe you can share a little bit of the origin story and how it's brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wish there were that aha moment, but unfortunately not. It was a very gradual kind of unfolding of the way I arrived at this. So I grew up in a Mexican household, of course, in the border. I was born in Juarez, Mexico, but we came here when I was 3 years old. And so we came here, and my dad, he's a migrant field worker. I was born in Juarez, and a lot of it was very much being like Mexican, but still being like in a different space, right? So you still felt like you were not from this new space, but you were still identified with being back from Mexico. So you were still in that in between. And the reason I'm sharing this story is because it ultimately informed a kind of disconnect with the American dream, right? In the sense of you're supposed to follow this path. Your family came here so you could follow this path in education. And I tried to do that. I went to college. I went to studied civil engineering at New Mexico State University, and I felt pretty miserably, to be honest. It just didn't resonate with me. I knew it was a path I was supposed to follow, and I hated it. So I was in and out of school for a long time until I lucked out and I stumbled into philosophy. So I got my degree at ACC, or like my associates at ACC. And I decided to go study at Southwestern University. And I was really lucky because at the time there was a professor there named Omar Rivera, who does a lot of Latin American and decolonial philosophy, social political thought. He's a Peruvian philosopher. And I was able to study under him, independent studies with him. And he really kind of took me under his wing. So I went through that process, learned to really just engage a lot of Latin American thought, decolonial thought. It just resonated with me more. Like I was able to like really follow that path and earn my degree. So along the way, I did, I served as a research assistant for his book. And we started looking into José Carlos Mariátegui. He had a publication called Amauta, which I spoke a little about in Latinx Spaces, like launch piece, and how it influenced my thinking there. And just saying, oh, there we go. Yeah, it really just, it was honestly almost pretty close to 100 years ago, but the way that media informed the political landscape and like the thought process and what it did, it really happened at the time of Bernie Sanders, Trump, right-wing media really just kind of taking a hold of the political imaginary. And in that sense, saying, hey, you know what? Media does inform the way we think and we understand the world. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? That's what I want to do. Like right before that, I wanted to go study, get my PhD in philosophy, become an academic, and like delve into Latin American philosophy more. And Latinx Spaces kind of like made me shift that in terms of what it does, like the way media informs, but then still kind of giving me that space to pursue that kind of like intellectual thought process, but like in a way that felt very concrete to me, like in a way that I felt like if I do this, if I work through this, I can really help, honestly, make an impact in the world at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's learning and learning as tested against reality, but then the kind of product of that being kind of put back into the world to transform it in and through the kind of media spaces that you're creating, right, with Latinx Space. Am I getting that? Did I get that
Yeah, no, that's a really great like way to put it. Because to be honest, um, so a lot of like what I studied and like a lot of what resonated with for me within that academic space was like this critique of modernity, like Western philosophy, right? There's like a big long thread within Latin American philosophy and the long tradition of critiquing that this subject object split that like we base so much of our understanding of the world in, right? And saying, you know what, like that doesn't really make sense in a lot of ways, you know, like saying like how our understanding and our way of being and our thinking is kind of like detached from the world in some way, you know, that just didn't make sense to me. Like I wanted to be able to like have something that felt very concrete in the way that like it made me like not only make an impact in the world, but really just navigate that space. And the media felt like the best way to do that, to say, hey, how do you help people? How do you understand things? How do you problematize things? How do you amplify things? And in a way that, you know, like it might make an impact.
Yeah.
There's also like a pop culture element to it, because along with that, you know, like I talk about like the subject object, like this kind of like split. I also think of like academia versus like popular culture, you know, and almost like there's almost seen as in a lot of ways mutually exclusive, you know, and that as far as like the tradition goes, right? And to me, that didn't make sense either. So much of what popular culture is and like how intelligent it is affects so much of what we do, right? And that's something that we see in some of the Latin American traditions, especially like for those Foucaultian, this popular thinking, just saying, hey, this is something that's part of our everyday. It's important that we acknowledge that and pursue that and give it the kind of importance it deserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the depth and breadth that you know, in this kind of philosophy and action process as a real counter, as a kind of resistance and a countermeasure to that huge onslaught of kind of mainstream media that's just puff and popcorn. And I'm not talking about like the actual stuff like films and comics and stuff. I'm talking about the industrial complex that's built in and around that kind of like, you know, that creates star systems and all of that stuff. And yours is like, hold on, let's take a pause. Let's pay, you know, give respect to this, but let's also bring these deeper questions to these problems. And let's have you kind of learn something new from this. Yeah, I love it. I love everything. When you and I met back in 2017, I was in San Antonio, and you know, things were just starting to pop for you. And I was just, you know, I just knew that, you know, we were going to be working together some way, somehow. And here we are. So cool, man.
Yeah.
So tell
No,
me,
no, no, no.
build.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, no,
Building.
absolutely. I agree. I think that like even then I realized some of the work that you were doing, right? And like that's one of the reasons where I said, you know, we would love to have you be part of the Latinx Spaces like editorial board, you know, because of your scholarship and the way that you really learned to delve into some like the popular element of media, right? And I think a lot of times people forget that even within that and within the Latin American tradition and Latinx tradition here, it's doing a lot of work in its own right. And a lot of times people don't delve into it or unpack it to where they're recognizing the kind of work it does. So for us, as we were creating Latinx Spaces and the publication and the kind of work that we do, it almost sort of like that twofold tradition, right? Number one is exposure and amplification of the work. And the second part is really just letting it do its own work, right? Like just really helping it, or not even helping it, but just really amplifying what it is that it's doing and just spreading it across and just seeing how it resonates with people.
So exciting. Now you're building your Latinx media community with Latinx Spaces. You launched in February of 2017. There are so many kind of working parts of this big kind of machine, if you will, of this, or maybe the many threads to this tapestry that you're creating, including with your extraordinary team. But what have been some of the big challenges that have been overcome? in building a kind of Latinx media community? What are some wonderful surprises? I know you're super excited about this and it's doing really well, but yeah, maybe you can share a little bit with us.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we wanted to launch like Latinx Media, Latinx Spaces was we really wanted to, and this is one of the things that I acknowledged, or we acknowledged from the very beginning. There's so many people doing amazing work throughout the United States, the Americas, and beyond, right? There's people doing, whether it's artists, museums, like political organizers, you know, like community leaders, like the academics, like the list goes on and on. And one of the challenges that we sought to overcome is that a lot of this we're seeing, it's almost delineated, right? There's somebody doing great in the community or within like a certain medium or a certain practice. And then somebody else is doing something great somewhere else. And then somebody else is doing something great somewhere else. And one of the things that we recognize is we really want to build a platform where we serve almost the connected to all these people doing this amazing work. Like we're seeing that, like we want somewhere that they can go both for thought leadership, media production, media consumption, like a space where they're being able to engage media in a way that they see themselves represented, in a way that feels intelligent, in a way that is honestly like going in a direction that they feel, right? Because media is not static as well. So that seeing the development of media in that way, like that was a big thing for us, saying, hey, how do we just begin to build a community in this way, you know, because we're seeing amazing people everywhere and they're just, you know, they're in their own sphere, they're doing what they're doing. It's amazing, but they're also like limited in resources, limited in time. And for us, we just wanted to serve in that space. And honestly, that's been one of the most exciting parts of Latinx Media and Latinx Spaces is that whenever I'm able to share this project with people, like they become so excited. And there's always and let me introduce you to moment, if that makes any sense. Like they get excited. There's a certain part of it that really just speaks to them. And they say, I love that. I either want to contribute. I want to contribute and introduce you to somebody else, or also want to introduce you to somebody else. It's never just like a end to a conversation. There's always more. And that's one of the ways that we've been able to grow, where people are really just, they love what we're doing and they want it to connect, you know. And it's also not Latinx exclusive. And that's the other thing. And what I mean by that is people outside that don't identify as Latin American, Latinx, anybody with Latinx or Latin American heritage, even that part of it, they recognize the importance of it and the need for it. And as we've spoken about the project, they've just been excited and they want to be a part of it or help in some way.
So exciting, Aaron, what you're building there. You know, just to kind of bring a couple of sound bites from your kind of piece about Latinx spaces, pluriversal, diverse, critical, in many ways, kind of echoing what you've just talked about, disrupting meta narratives that continue to sustain systems of oppression and exclusion, to bring light to Latin American dispositions, sensibilities through the promotion of Latinx arts and cultures. Is there something you wanted to kind of add to these wonderful and this sort of worldview that you're presenting here?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to both of them. So it's kind of funny because, like I said earlier, I really wanted to be a graduate student, right? I really wanted to get my PhD in philosophy. And when I made the shift, I decided, you know what, I really want to write for this publication, right? To really just work on sharing thoughts, like social political thought within the publication. And the thing is, I haven't really written for it. And it's not lack of willingness, but because I do want it to be like this pluriversal space, right? I wanted to have that plurality to that dialogue. Like if I just write, then it becomes, you know, my voice. And that from the very beginning, I knew there was not really very much value in that, right? Like it was very much about saying, hey, let's reach out to people. Let's have them share their thoughts. Let's have them share their expertise and really make it like a really like rich, diverse dialogue in that way. I think of like I think of like thought leaders, right? That go publish in the Atlantic, or they publish in the New York Times or the New Yorker, whatever the publication is. Even when I can think of Latinx, Latin American thought leaders, they might go to that publication, and we're excited to see them in that space, right? And we're like, oh, that's great. Like they published in there, they shared their thoughts, and then that's it. Like there's no actual space where we have this, where there's a constant engagement in that. And that was really important to me, is that we say, hey, again, the plurality of thought, but also a place of like thought leadership where we really can begin to engage in some of that like work, from there. To the other point here, in terms of like meta narratives, that was important to me in terms of like the actual work of the publication. So, so much of the conversation within, especially like here in the United States, is very like Democrat versus Republican, very, and to a lot of people that are able to step outside of that dichotomy, they're two sides of the same coin, right? You really have to be able to like speak to those meta narratives that sustain those systems of oppression and exclusion in like a broader sense. When we start talking about capital, we start talking to the prison industrial complex, we start talking about voting rights, like disenfranchisement. We start talking like police systems. So like there's so much more of it that goes into it. And a lot of times that we're not able to move beyond those meta narratives that we automatically subscribe to and legitimize within our like social spaces, then we're confined to that, like that's the world that's possible to us. And for us, like in a lot of ways, it was like, let's let this publication, let's let this, as it expands, this media company, be able to shift outside of those limits, right? Like think of like the Zapatistas, where a world where many worlds exist, being able to like shift beyond that and say, hey, there's a lot of other possibilities that we honestly don't even take as possible, because again, we're tied to those meta narratives and like that's what binds us to this. So it was really much to say to be able to shift beyond that.
So important. And I love, you're referencing to kind of the Atlantic, the New Yorker, but also kind of separating them and saying, look, we have thought leadership. We have, we have created a critical thinking, learning, engaging space here with Latinx Spaces. You've put together this dream team. Maybe you've already mentioned in passing how you really wanted this to be a place that crosses lines of gender and ethno-race, et cetera. And it's definitely represented here. But can you tell us about your Latinx dream team?
Yeah, no, it honestly, like a lot of like the way the team has come together was just me sharing the vision of what this publication would do and like what we strive to do. And people just saying, hey, that really sounds like something, number one, that's needed, and number two, that I want to be a part of. And that's how this whole thing started rolling. Like honestly, like Luis, Richard, Christina, Meg were all with us from the very, very beginning. And they said, you know what, I want to be a part of this. And we just started building from there. Like they all bring their own area of expertise within the space. And in a lot of ways, for me, it wasn't just about them knowing what that space is, but just really being able to like expand on that space. So if that makes any sense, like I'll take, for example, Christina here, like, she's a writer, she's an extremely talented writer, and she's from the University of Texas literature program there. And for her, like she hadn't done a lot of interviews, with like other writers, but just saying, you know what, I trust your vision, I trust the work that you're doing. And she's been really able to expand that literature section. She's had some great conversations with like Sandra Cisneros, for example, like she's been able to really just develop that section, that role, and be just having a trust in everybody that's part of the team and saying, you know what, I really want you to take ownership of that and really run with it. And a lot of what my goal is, both as the founder here and really just someone that is leading this project, like not leading it from in front, like I'm not dictating. It's not like a unilateral conversation, but really just allowing that space to where people can really follow, contribute, and just, again, just being faithful to that plurality of the publication, so where we can say, you know what, it does have the input of a lot of people. It does have input a lot of perspectives. And once that happens, this is the outcome. This is what it looks like.
Really extraordinary. And I know that, in fact, Latinx Spaces is also, a lot of the work that you have to do is to keep Latinx Space, the space itself, give it breathing room to do what you want it always to do: thought leadership, media leadership, but always focused, on Latinx creatives, intellectual thought, politics, voices, because the televisual and the media industrial complex from the mainstream side, I know, are constant walls, like pushing in, right? They want a piece of you. They want you to be the one to respin in a favorable light, Coyote, for instance, or something. And you're like, no, actually, we might take that on, but we're gonna be honest about, how we're praising, how we're engaging, how we want people to learn in and through this piece. Yeah, really, really awesome, Aaron.
No, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. They're 100% right. Like, I think so much of our history has been like extremely bad representation within media, or no representation within media, right? So that now that we're seeing things like, for example, like Coyote, where you mentioned there, where we see something, it's almost seen as like it should be deemed as a positive right off the bat, just in having some sort of like participation within that, if you want to call it that, and for us, it's saying, you know what, we have to be critical of this as well, and when I say critical, like, I mean that in the very sense of the word, like employing critical lens to really like unpack what's happening here, and not just say, hey, there's somebody that looks like us on the TV or sounds like us on TV or within like this medium, whatever it may be, but saying, okay, what's actually happening? What are, again, those meta narratives that are kind of unfolding within that, whether it's like that of an immigrant, or, like there's so many things that go into that, like a, Catholic household or Catholic Latino household, and so on and so forth, right? But just saying, hey, we have to look beyond that superficiality of it and just, be able to unpack what's happening beyond that.
Amazing. Aaron, what, in Latinx media, the creatives working today, pushing back and clearing new spaces. I'm just going to ask you, I know you have like little tiny amounts of time in your everyday, because you've got so much going on, so much that you're responsible for. But is there something that's really exciting for you right now in this space? I don't know if anyone's asked you that.
Yeah, no, it's not something I get asked too often, to be honest. I'm just so like head down on things. But I will tell you that, for example, like I see Selena here, like I grew up with Selena. Selena was just playing constantly. I still remember the day she was taken from us. Like it's something that even now as a parent, I have my daughters listening to, so it's very much something where I love seeing it. I shouldn't say it's a resurgence, but it almost feels that way, right? Because I'm seeing her more and more, and I love that. I think that's amazing. Entified, I love the show. It really is an incredible show, so I'm excited for season 2. But in terms of like my media consumption, a lot of it's music, to be honest. I'll listen a lot to, I'm a little more old school, but I'll listen to like Enanitos Verdes, Maná, like newer stuff. I really like Daddy Yankee, like Calle 13, Residente, and his documentary where he kind of traces his lineage there as well. So those were really exciting parts from there. But I'm excited to continue to see what people are producing here. Like Entified was something new that I was just turned on like maybe 6 months ago, and it completely blew my mind. It's so smart. So just seeing that kind of production here, and I know we have more coming down the pipeline. So excited to see what people come up with.
Yeah, it makes a difference having writers, showrunners, and actors, people behind but in front of the cameras, making Latinx, stories, right? It makes a big difference. Let me just say this: I'm not surprised that music is your kind of go-to, because I know how busy you are, and so I imagine, if you're, in the car and driving, you'll be able to, immerse yourself into that kind of space, and it's not like the investment a movie or, even a TV show would require. Challenges and surprises kind of goes back a little bit to our earlier conversation, but what have been the big challenges and surprises for you?
Oh, that's a really interesting question there, because it is challenging. I can speak to several of them, and they kind of translate across different avenues, if you will, right? I think that being able to articulate Latinx Spaces as a publication to people in some ways that aren't part of like the media landscape has been really challenging, in the sense that a lot of times people want to think of media in just in the conventional sense, right? And then them actually understanding the work it's doing beyond that, it doesn't really happen until you're really in it, consuming the content, and then you recognize that, right? But beyond that, like, it's something that we see within advertising, marketing, like those kind of worlds, right? They just think, hey, if you have somebody that speaks Spanish in a commercial, or you have somebody that speaks Spanish, and that's it, like that's going to hit the mark. And absolutely not. That's not it at all. So just understanding the kind of work that goes beyond that, to say, hey, we're shifting beyond, again, this like known world, if you will, in terms of like these meta narratives, and trying to like move beyond that. One of the things that I do when I articulate this project to people, the way that I really try to make sense of it to them in terms of like Latinx culture, is honestly, like, just historically, we think of a lot of times people think of colonization in the sense of like, hey, this happened 500 years ago. People of light skin came to the Americas, they identified, consolidated themselves as European, and they colonized the Americas, and that was it, and there was nothing left, right? And to me, that this is where I tell them, like, I try to like bring the point across that, what, that's not the case at all. There were so many modes of resistance, and a lot of it was through these aesthetic practices, right? Whether it was music or art or literature or food, right? And there's histories and lineages to that like go way back. And this is the kind of work that like Latinx Spaces is trying to do, like really amplifying that, and let those lineages do that kind of work through these like practices, like when you engage with, like one of my favorite bands is Combo Chimbita right now. And there's like Afro Latino, like, or Afro Latinx elements to that in the music, that they have a history to that. They're doing a kind of work, and you have to be attentive to that. But at the same time, you don't, you're just listening, you're just loving it, you're just moving to it. So that's part of the work. The second part that I found really surprising, or not surprising, but exciting about it, and this was all theoretical in some way before we launched, and it's become part of it, is that the way that narratives move us has been really impactful. Like if you and I have a disagreement, we have a debate, right? Like I can have my points, you can have your points. We may go back and forth, and let's say you win the argument based on just having a few better points. At the end of the day, did you convince me, or will I just say like, oh, you know what, that guy didn't know what he was talking about, and I'm set in my ways? But when you engage narratives, whether it's film or literature or art, there's like a certain kind of move that happens, or that happens gradually within people, and just being able to like engage in that's something that like we're starting to see through some of our content, some of like the responses that we're getting from people, and honestly, what we're hoping to continue to do, like and expand on in a lot of like much bigger ways. So I think that's been something that's been really surprising and exciting. I think challenges moving forward that we're going to have to face is just continue to grow. I mean, we're going to continue to grow, continue to expand. And I don't mean challenges in like, I guess for like negative connotations, but just saying like, as we grow, as we continue to expand, like we have to remain faithful to that plurality of voices, plurality of content, plurality of making sure that we're faithful to what this project is. And I'm definitely on board, like our editorial advisory board is on board. The people that are like we're working with are on board. But it's a constant work on yourself and faithfulness in that sense, right? So it's a constant reflexivity. That is what I'm trying to speak to there, that you continuously have to do that kind of work, because like at the end of the day, none of us are infallible, right? So that's where the plurality of voices really is important, because we're all continuously doing that work. We're all continuously doing that reflection. And that's why it's, in my sense, it's a powerful medium in that way.
Yeah, what we're doing, what we're seeing happen with Latinx Spaces is the making of a living, breathing archive that in every second of its existence resists the push toward culture side. A lot of people think genocide, but we forget that a big part of genocide is to erase culture. And in fact, Latinx Spaces is not only pushing against that, it's becoming this important repository for that. And then, of course, like you said, storytelling as a way to stitch us together, the gel that kind of brings us together in this space. So beautifully articulated. The vitality in Latinx media today. And here I wonder, you were just talking about, and I completely understand the analogy to the kind of thought and media leadership, depth and breadth learning of a New Yorker or the Atlantic. Of course, Latinx Spaces has a very different worldview, but it's something we take as seriously. What do you like? Where's the vitality in other media spaces that are being kind of constructed? Where do you see Latinx Spaces needing to go in order to make sure that we don't become just another cog in the industrial kind of media complex that just wants to basically prop up for a second something in order to make money?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question and a really valid point, because I think even as people or media companies have tried to reach out to Latinx consumers, that's something that they've fallen victim, or I shouldn't say fallen victim to, but they've kind of fallen into, right, themselves, right? I think what's important here is that we're continuously problematizing, and I don't mean that again with negative connotations, but being reflective of the kind of content that we're producing, the kind of voices that we're amplifying, and just being faithful to those cultures, those lineages that we're working with and working through to produce our content with. One of the things that that's really been integral to the project, or that's integral to me in the project, is that I want to make sure that, again, it serves as a connector of sorts for so many people within so many different mediums doing work. And that's not only people that are established within those fields, whatever they may be, whether it's museum work or whatever it is, but also the people that don't have the means to continue to do that kind of work. So what I mean by that is there's so many artists, for example, musicians, writers that honestly don't have the means to sustain that, because they have to work a 9 to 5, or they have to work a 5 to 9, whatever that is, to really just meet their material needs every day. And my goal is to establish a publication that can serve, or a media company that can serve as a pipeline for them, for people that do want to produce content and share content. And we're able to do that. We're able to provide resources so that they can continue to do that. So if there's an amazing artist that can't continue to pursue that artwork or that practice, they have the means to do so. That's ultimately the goal of that. And if we're continue to do that, then it inherently is a pluriversal publication, because it's coming from so many different perspectives, so many different lineages. there's a media company that's actually pretty prominent right now for African American content creators called Blavity, right? And it's meant to be like amplifying Black voices. And a lot of what they do is really, they have like a revenue source where when people submit videos, they're compensated for the videos depending on what it is, right? Like if they have like, and they're able to like produce content and kind of build off of that. So it becomes more diverse in that way. And that's in holding to that principle, something that I want Latinx Spaces to do. I think that when it's pluriversal in that way, then it can mean so many things. I think that the moment it becomes tied to my vision or what are the editor's vision, and that's it, then we've lost the way. So that's at the core what it needs to remain faithful to.
So incredible. All of this clearing of and creating of this space for Latinx creatives, for future gen critical thinkers, writers. I know we've got a lot happening, in our collaborations. What's exciting for you in terms of the kind of collaborations that that we've already launched together?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how excited I am about this collaboration. This Latinx Pop Lab at Astro Media, Project Jimenez, and us coming together on this. It really is one of the things that like is really amazing to me, and it's going to be integral to this, is really being able to connect with youth, right? And just understanding, like, at the end of the day, like the Latinx population is growing exponentially within the United States. We are becoming a louder voice. We're becoming like a bigger voice, if you will, in that sense, right? And being able to connect with youth from the very beginning, like Project Malice at Astro Media, like just being able to set that pipeline, helping them reach that level of education, that level of whatever it is that they want to pursue in that sense, but like really equipping them with tools to do that is important in that first sense. The second part, the space within itself of the Pop Lab, being able to have somewhere in the university where students know that they can go, where it's a space for them, where we can create programming that can be big, whether it's the symposium in the spring or smaller, whether it might be like artist talks or, just whatever those panel discussions or whatever that may be. That's going to be huge. And then number 3 is the goal is to establish Latinx Spaces and Latinx Media as an extreme, like a prominent media company, something in scope as Vice, as Vox, as some of these big ones and what they're doing, so that, again, we have something that is representative of Latinx, Latin American communities, and something that is intimately connected with the Pop Lab. And from there, like serves as like a pipeline for students where they are able to connect with media production as they see, not as it needs to be, like just being able to create that distinction for them and say, you know what, if you want to create media content and you want to create, be a part of this world in that sense, you don't have to adhere to those standards that we're kind of all having to deal with right now, right? Like there's something else, and that's the goal.
This has been quite incredible, Aaron. I want to thank you for your vision, your labor, your hard work, your collective leadership in clearing and creating and maintaining and growing a space for Latinx creativity, creative thought, critical thinking, and for today and tomorrow. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm excited for things to come. It's good to be here with you and for the work we're going to do together.